Good evening. Welcome to San Mateo County Dental Society's meeting. It looks like we have a great audience joining us tonight. My name is Mike Icardi, and I'm the membership specialist here at SMCDS. Before we get started, I want to review how we'll be running the meeting. All participants will be placed on mute. Tonight's presenter will provide information about dental service organizations. During the presentation, you may post a question in the Q&A box. For those participants on your desktop, the Q&A box is located on the bottom of your screen. For those on an iPad or iPhone, the Q&A box should be on the upper right. Please feel free to post your questions, and if time permits, we'll go over them at the end. So now let's get started. Ali Oromchian is one of the nation's leading legal authorities on topics relevant to dentists. Since its creation, the Dental and Medical Counsel PC law firm has been regarded as one of the preeminent healthcare law firms devoted exclusively to healthcare professionals. His clients seek his advice on dental and medical practice transitions, creation of corporations and partnerships, associate contracts, estate planning, employment law matters, office leasing, and state board defense. Please welcome Ali.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And it's great to be here. You know, I always love the San Mateo Dental Society and a huge supporter. And we found out something really interesting while we were, getting ready for tonight's presentation. Mike, Jim, and I realized that we have known each other since their first day at the San Mateo Dental Society 17 years ago, which also happened to be the first year that our law firm opened up its doors, exclusively serving dentists. So it's pretty funny that that 17 years has gone by the way it has. So anyhow, so it's fun to be able to do this. This is a really important topic that is absolutely relevant today, and shows us why all of you are getting contacted by these DSOs and these groups, and why over 70 of you have registered for tonight's presentation, because it is a very, very hot topic. And the reason it's hot is because there are like never before groups that are called dental service organizations who are out there, looking to buy your offices, looking for you to partner with them, looking for you to, enter into some sort of management relationship with them. And so we're going to go through all of these tonight and talk about, what you need to think about. We're going to talk about how these groups operate, what their strategies are, what things you should avoid to do, because it is a business transaction, and most of these folks are funded by private equity, which means that they have a lot of people with a lot of MBAs and finance degrees and other things behind them. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do a transaction with them. What it means, though, is you need to be fully aware, before you go into a transaction with them, because it's very, very easy to fall trap into something that you weren't expecting, or something that you didn't want to do as part of your career and your retirement, whatnot. We're not going to talk about transitions per se, so we're not going to talk about selling your practice through a broker or selling it yourself or any of those things. That's not the point of tonight's seminar. Tonight's seminar is about DSOs and what they are, who they're for, could they be a good option for you? I have this funny picture I'm going to show next, because when you think about DSOs, you usually think about money. And people think that, every transaction with a DSO means a lot of money exchanging hands. And what you're going to see, today is that that's not always the case. Yes, you hear about, people getting huge numbers for their practices, and that is happening, and it is happening even today, even though there's a slowdown. But it's not for everyone. Not everyone gets these big dollars, and a lot of this, has to do with the type of practice you have, your profitability, who you have on your team helping you negotiate these deals. All of these things make a big difference. And when I say your team, it of course includes your lawyers, but more importantly, includes your CPAs, includes others who may not necessarily be as knowledgeable about a DSO transaction. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And like most things, as you can imagine, it always comes down to the little items, the things that make the biggest differences. And it's usually not about how many new patients you got last month, or what expenses you ran through the office. It usually has to do with a lot of other things having to do with the structure of the transaction and whatnot. And so we're going to talk about those as well, and so that you guys are very well aware of the not only of the process, but of how to handle the process if selling to a DSO is something that you are considering. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a dental attorney. My wife is a pediatric dentist in the East Bay, and so I know this industry in and out. But more importantly, like many of you, she is being contacted by a lot of DSOs, and some good, some bad DSOs, and everything in between. And and so this is an opportunity for you to ask questions tonight, knowing that I'm not just a dental lawyer, of course, but also someone who lives your life going through a very similar situation, in terms of making those kind of decisions in our lives and in her life as well. So as Mike said, there's a Q&A box on your screen. Feel free to ask questions there, and then at the end I will go through and answer those. Don't wait until the end, because you might forget your questions. So ask away, and but if I don't answer it until the end, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just waiting to the end. All right. So here's the structure of tonight's seminar. We're going to first talk about an introduction to DSOs. What are they and how do they work? Okay, because that's not always super clear. Okay, then we're going to talk about the types of DSO structures, and we're going to talk about what the most common ones are, what the least common ones are, and everything in between, because you need to know how they operate. And then we'll talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of DSOs and selling to them and partnering up with them. And then how do you actually enter into a partnership with them? And how do you make sure that you don't get taken advantage of, or that you're not part of the horror stories that you sometimes hear? And we're going to talk a little bit about those as well, because they are very real. Not a lot of people talk about them because they are, horror stories, and there are things that people have gone, things have gone south. But they are important to know so that we can learn from them. Okay, so let's jump in. We're going to talk about DSOs in general. So what is a DSO? So a DSO, in essence, is a management company that has been created either by other dentists or non-dentists, and those non-dentists can be anybody and anybody. It could be people with MBAs, it could be private equity folks, it could be hygienists, it could be other dentists. I mean, it could be really anybody who wants to create a management company to be able to provide services to you as a dentist. Now, when we think about that, right, when we think about a management company doing this, right, what we're starting to think about is, all right, are these clinical or non-clinical services? Well, always non-clinical, right? So always non-clinical, because a clinical service in a dental practice must be provided by a dental corporation, okay, by a dental corporation. So they're usually non-clinical services. So we're talking insurance coordination, HR, marketing contracts, billing contracts, anything that is more business related, a DSO or a management company will do. When they start to provide these services to a multitude of practices, okay, then they start to grow as a DSO. So they become larger and larger and larger. And what they do is they buy all of these offices and they provide those services to those individualized offices, who then pay for that service. So in other words, if you wanted to hire a management company, you would hire them to provide sort of a list of services to you. So you say, for example, I want you to give me, HR services, and I want you to give me marketing services and insurance billing services and credentialing information and all this stuff. And then I'm going to pay you a sum of money for that every month. Of course, the idea there is that if you're going to do that, then you're hoping to either eliminate a position in your office or not pay somebody else to do it for you, because otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to pay two people to do it. So that's sort of the at a high level what these management services do. And so how do they do it efficiently? Well, they use technology to help them achieve these results, right? So they use services like HR for Health and other, softwares to be able to streamline these operations across the platform, right? So across all dental practices that they have contracts with, they provide those services to those offices, and that creates cost savings for them, and in theory for you as well. Okay, so that is what these DSOs provide. Now, before COVID and before really, the explosion of DSOs and these management companies, especially here in California, they had bad reputations because these management companies or whatnot would come in and they would want to change everything in your office, right? So you would contract with them or you would sell to them, which we'll talk about in a second. And they would come in and they would fire employees and they would change protocols. And a lot of doctors felt like they were losing control. That is no longer the case for most of these management companies and DSOs. Most of them now don't make these drastic changes in the office. In fact, they make very little changes, although they try to streamline some things with your help, as I just mentioned. They try to disrupt the office as little as possible because they're hoping for you to keep your revenues the way they are, or grow them, of course, while they work with you in terms of reducing expenses. Okay, in reducing expenses. Now, why? Why are they doing that? Why are they not disrupting the office like they used to disrupt them pre-COVID, right? Instead of this explosion. Well, this is where the business of these management companies and DSOs really comes out. Okay, so the way this works, is that private equity, and sometimes it's family offices and otherwise, but we'll just say it's private equity money, is funding these groups, these DSOs, and they are tasked with going out to the marketplace and buying dental practices. Now, most of almost every endo practice in the Bay Area has been bought, right? There are very few independent endo practices left. And those that are left are either too small to be bought or they're really holding out and don't want to sell to a DSO. Well, this is happening across the platform, right? This is happening to GP offices, it's happening to pedo and ortho, it's definitely happening in oral surgery. Pros is sort of, slowly coming around. There's not as much, interest in that from DSOs, but there is some still. But this movement, the reason why they're aggressively purchasing offices right now, and why many of you have gotten letters and phone calls and all of this, is because they have to take this money from these private equity groups and put it to use, and that use is to buy you. Why? Because they will pay a large multiple to you for you to sell your practice to them. Now, I'm going to throw out some numbers for you, and if you need me to clarify any of this later in the Q&A section, I'm totally happy to. But just walk with me down this path. When you sell your practice to another dentist, just a single, buyer, traditionally, you used a broker or you found a colleague to buy it or anything of that nature, you usually will sell it for somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5 multiples of your profits. Okay, 1.5 to 2.5x of your profit. Okay, so what that means is that if you have $1 million practice, just hypothetically, just to keep the numbers easy, And let's say you profited, $300,000 from that office, right? So that was your take home. You could get 1.5 to 2.5 times that 300. Okay, that's how a normal sale works right now. So 1.5 to 2.5 times profit. Okay. A DSO right now, on average, pays anywhere from 6 to 8 multiples of profit. Okay, so not 1.5 to 2.5, but 6 to 8. Okay. Now, I just did a deal for 12.5% multiples, for an oral surgery group. Okay. But most of them on average are 6 to 8 times. Okay. So very different than 1.5 to 2.5, right? I mean, more than double, almost triple what you could get from a single buyer. Okay. So what they do, right? What they do is they pay you that lump of money. They streamline the operations, as I mentioned, right? They bring in technology and other things, try to bring down the expenses. And then they take all the offices that they just bought and they sell it to another private equity group or a larger DSO for 12, 14x, right? So they bought you for 6 to 8, and then they turn around and they sell it for 12 to 14, right? Plus or minus. So they've doubled their money, right? And you go along for the ride too, right? You go along, and I'll explain that in a second. And then that group, and that, by the way, that time from the time they buy you to the time they sell, again, is usually anywhere from, well, it's usually about 3 years. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but it's usually about 3 years. And then that group that just bought you for 12 to 14 will turn around and sell again for 18, 20, whatnot, right? So they keep growing the groups and then turning around and selling. Okay. So that's why private equity is in this business, right? Because they know that they can spend a lot of money, but they can double it pretty quick and then potentially double it again, or get another sale down the road. So they are benefiting from this arbitrage, if you will, right? And they're now there's a lot of things that are tied to all of this. I'm just giving you the high level because it's not all it's not all positive things, of course, and there's a lot of risks involved, and we'll talk a lot about that. But that's just generally speaking the structure of these transactions. This is why private equity and others are throwing a ton of money into this, right? A ton of money into this. Now, remember, it's all about economies of scale. It's all about reducing the expenses, because remember, it's a multiple of profit, right? They are paying you 6 to 8 times profit, not revenue, profit. The reason that's important for you to know is because, $1 million practice that does, $200,000 of profit is going to be worth less than $1 million practice that does $500,000 of profit. Okay, so I want you to remember that. This is very important, because at the end of the seminar tonight, I'm going to tell you one major mistake that I want you all to avoid if you're thinking about selling to a DSO. And if you don't remember anything else I tell you, I want you to remember that, okay? Because it is the #1 mistake sellers make when selling to a group, to a DSO, and they're hoping you make this mistake, which is why they're sending you letters and all this kind of stuff. And it makes the biggest impact in your financials. And we'll talk about that, a little bit later, okay? All right, so now that you know the structure, you know why they're doing it, you know how they're doing it, which is by scaling your operations, by bringing in technologies to streamline the whole process to increase their profits so they could sell for more, okay? This plus COVID has caused a huge surge of DSO sales all across the country, but especially here in California, and especially here in the Bay Area. If you had asked me in 2019, pre-COVID, If I thought DSOs were a problem, I would have said, nope, there's a lot of them selling, buying practices in Texas and Florida and parts of the Midwest, but it's not a problem here. They're not that prevalent. We don't really see them. There's a lot of pushback. Well, that's not the case anymore. After COVID, it absolutely exploded. It absolutely exploded. And right now, we are, probably 30% of the market is the last number I heard. I think it was like 32, 33% of the market of dental practices in the country are owned by a DSO or some sort of group, which is a massive, massive number, and it will continue to grow potentially. Now, of course, people like me who believe in the independent, practice owner, are encouraging a lot of young dentists who are coming out of school to open up their own practices or buy practices so that, we have a lot of independent, dentists who continue owning. But there's no doubt that many of you who are, in the latter half of your careers are looking to sell to DSOs because you are their target audience. If you're, 65 and you're planning on retiring in the next year, you're not the target for them. They're looking for folks who are, in 45 and up who want to work, 5 years or more, because it fits into their timeline, right? It fits into their timeline. And so that's, this shift that's happening is happening very quickly, and there's no denying it, right? There's absolutely no denying it. So as they get this money from these private equity firms, what is the intent? Are they only going after the largest groups? Well, that used to be the case, right? It used to be that even as early as, or as recently, I should say, as 2020, 2021, a lot of these DSOs used to go after, groups or owners that had 2, 3, 4, 5 offices, themselves. But now, because a lot of those have already sold and transitioned, what are they doing now? They're coming in after the solo practice owner. So many of you who own one office, maybe you have a satellite office or you have a second office, they're coming after you because they know that, you are their future, right? You are their lifeline to continue expanding. And for them, it's a little bit more work because instead of buying, 7 at a time, they're buying 1 at a time or 2 at a time. But it's okay because they take all these practices, they add them up, and then they sell, right? They sell them as a group. So it's something that it's the reason why many of you are getting these letters. So how do they achieve this? Well, a lot of this starts with their partnership conversations, right? So they they want you to believe in their entity, because if you don't sell to them, you don't believe in the future that they're showing you, that the fact that they will take you and your investment and then they will grow it by selling it, then that partnership fails. Now, the part that I left out earlier in the story is that when you sell, okay, you don't sell 100% to private equity. Usually, when you sell to a DSO, you sell anywhere from 50 to 70%. Okay, so you're keeping sometimes 50% to 30% of your practice. Now, it's structured kind of in a complicated way where you actually buy sort of a subsidiary and so on and so forth. But just at the end of the day, you're not selling 100%, you're selling 50 to 70%. So you're maintaining, a portion of it. That is the dream, right? That's what they're selling you, because yes, you got a lot of money up front, but what they want is they want your buy-in so that when they sell in 3 years and they sell for double what they paid you, you also benefit by getting that extra multiple on the 30% or 50% that you maintain. And then you can sell those shares, not all, but some. And then, if you decide to, participate again and they sell, let's say, another 3 years, then you get to participate again. And that's really where the DSOs, that's the dream that they sell. That's the strategic planning, the financial and the wealth building that they talk about with you, because that's how they make their big money, and that's how they want you to believe that you will make that big money, right? And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. There's been 3 major DSO blowups this year, right? And we're only in August, right? 3 major DSOs who one had, I believe, 30, the other one had like 12, and another one had something in between, just imploded, right? Imploded, and the doctors, had to take back their offices, and I mean, it was a little bit of a mess. And so picking the right partner, picking the right DSO is very important, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. And the management, the funding behind them, their experience, the offices that they own, all of these things make a very big difference in terms of whether or not you should join that DSO, because not all DSOs, of course, are structured equally. But that is what they're selling you. They're selling you that dream of taking a couple $1 million that you got up front and doubling it every 3 years, right? And I will tell you, it does happen, right? It does happen. We've had a lot of clients whose practices we have helped sell who have made tens of millions of dollars going through this process. And they're very happy and very satisfied because it worked out. They picked the right people. And unfortunately, there are some who, I mean, nobody that we've helped with directly, but some that we've, have become our clients after the fact to help them get out of problem situations, who, it didn't work out so well because it wasn't a good situation. So let's talk, as we shift gears, let's talk about the types of DSO structures. Now, there isn't one DSO structure. Every DSO structure can be broken up and divided into a million pieces because they all have something different about them, right? That's how they differentiate themselves, right? There's a group out of Arizona, for example, who promises a whole bunch of things because they say that they don't actually own any of your business. You're just part of some club together. But if they sell, you have to come along with the club. I mean, there's all different variations of it, and some good, some bad. And again, that all depends on your goals too, right? So let's talk about a couple of the major models, right? And again, remember, a lot of these have different offshoots of them. So this is more kind of high level, and then there's variations. So the first one is called the joint venture model, right? And this joint venture model basically is for the doctor or the practice that whereby the dentist owner retains all day-to-day control, right? So nothing changes from a day-to-day perspective. They still have to hire employees. They still are doing, all the basic things, but they partner, with one of these groups to provide, some services to them, right? So it could be, they may share in some of the responsibilities for taxes. They may share some of the responsibilities in terms of HR and marketing and other kinds of things and decision making. But they're, like it says, a joint venture. They are, like partners together. So even though the dentist retains almost all day-to-day management control, they do split some, of the decision-making responsibilities. And usually those are the things that most people don't want to deal with, right? The insurance bills, the credentialing and verification and HR and all of that, okay? Now, the benefit to the dentist here is that you get some support from an external source, the DSO, and their expertise, because they hopefully know, the market very well, and they know what services you need and whatnot, and they've done their due diligence on that. But you keep all clinical autonomy, right? So they have, they don't have any say whatsoever in the kind of dentistry you do, what cases you take, what refunds you provide. I mean, they have they don't have any say in that, right? They don't have any say in that. And this is the one that I think most people want to do when they think about selling to a DSO, because the reality is they want many of you just love dentistry so much, you just want to do dentistry. You don't want to do all the business side of things. This doesn't apply to all of you, but many of you. And so this joint venture model kind of provides that, because you get to focus on your dentistry and your production and whatnot. And then the the DSO kind of handles whatever you don't like, if it's part of their services. And so it's sort of an ideal process in that regard. In this model too, you do, like I mentioned, you sell usually 60 to 70% of the practice. You maintain the 30 or 40% of that, and it rolls over in essence to a larger entity. Now, today these joint venture models are true collaborative efforts of the parties really sitting down and talking through the model, because again, remember, it's good for them, for the DSO, and it's good for you for revenues to be up and expenses to be low. So it's a very collaborative effort, right? A very collaborative effort. This is also great for someone who has a long runway, right? If you have, if you are still planning on practicing for 5 or more years, this is a really good model for you. If you're planning on retiring, and stop practicing less than 5 years, this one is going to be a little bit harder model for you. Okay, the next one is called a sub DSO model, and this is where you partially exit the practice, and you get a certain payment for your exit. And when I say partially exit, what I'm really talking about there is not necessarily from a sale perspective. You're still selling 50 to 70%, like I was talking about, but you're cutting back as well, right? You're cutting back from the practice, and maybe cutting back your clinical days. You're cutting back from that whole perspective. And that, that can be sometimes pretty scary for these DSOs, because if you cut back and there's not associates in place, or they don't have replacements or whatnot, then it could be, the revenues could fall, the production could fall, and things of that nature. And so there's sometimes a real risk that's involved there. And because of that risk, sometimes these DSOs will actually want you to retain even more ownership than in the other, joint venture model. So instead of like maybe owning, or selling 60-70%, maybe they, want you to hold on to 50%, because they think that there's just a little bit more risk there. Okay. Now, of course, in this model too, they provide a lot of management support to you. You get to benefit from some of the profits, of course, in that model, because you still own a lot. And so there's there's some pros there, and some benefits from doing that. But again, because they're taking more risk, you're maintaining more of your ownership stake. There's also a little bit more risk to you, because instead of selling 70% and cashing out and letting 30% roll over to the future entities, you're rolling over even more, right? You're rolling over even more. Okay. So the next one is an equity roll, right? And now an equity roll is you as the seller sell 100%. Okay, you sell 100% to the DSO, and you want to, you may still want to work a few days, but you just don't want any rollover whatsoever. Now, in these kind of scenarios, it's usually for the person who wants to work less than 5 years. And even that, they want to work sometimes less than 3 years, right? So less than 3 years. So a lot of times we see this for those who are, either ill or injured, or maybe they have some slight disability, or they're maybe in their early 60s and they just don't want to practice for a long time, right? They don't want to practice for a long time. Now, the price for these practices are actually not as high as the first two. Remember those multiples that I was mentioning the first two times, where you get 6 to 8x your profit. When you do an equity roll like this, you actually get close to what you would get if you sold to a private, dentist, which is anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 times, your profit. Sometimes it's a little bit more, but usually it's still in that 1.5 to 2.5 times of profit. So just kind of keep that in mind. And the reason it's so low, or not so low, but the reason it goes back to sort of those numbers is because the reality is that the transaction is a full transfer, right? You're letting go of the practice altogether, right? And you're saying, okay, DSO, this is now your practice. I don't want anything to do with it. So they're taking on even more risk and then the first two options, because you're not guaranteed to necessarily stay at all. And so they will just pay you less, right? They would pay you less. Now, the nice thing is, if you are financially secure and you don't need the second bite at the apple or the third bite at the apple that we were describing, this is your clear exit strategy, right? This is your clear exit strategy because you will sell to a large group that's professionally managed. The likelihood of them coming back and doing things that maybe individual buyers will complain about, retreatment and some other things doesn't really exist because these DSOs are just sort of machines, if you will. And you have a clear plan forward, right? You have a clear plan forward because you know that whoever's buying your office is coming in with full management team. They're taking everything over operationally, and they are ready to rock and roll. And so so a lot of times, right, a lot of times they you have a lot less to worry about in these kinds of scenarios. But again, remember, if you're financially secure, you don't want the second and third bite of the apples. If you want to sell to a DSO and just kind of be done with it, this is a good plan. Okay. All right. So what are the advantages of selling to a DSO? Why should you consider selling potentially? Well, as we talked about, they increase efficiency of the practice, right? So they streamline the operations. They have workflows. They work with your team to make sure that the operations are super flawless, which allows you to really focus a lot on patient care. And a lot of dentists that we talk to who want to sell to a DSO, they talk about, still loving dentistry, still wanting to practice, still, caring about their patients. But they just don't want the business side of it anymore. And this has become even more and more true because of COVID, because now you have, all the PPEs and you have all these other rules and regulations and whatnot that you have to abide by. And of course, things like HR are not getting easier. So it's just more stressful, let alone, hiring being as difficult as it is. It just, people are just kind of tired, right? So allowing you to focus on the patient side of things while they take care of everything else is one definite positive. The other thing is there's economies of scale, as we talked about. So they will make sure that they incorporate things, that are, that are super advantageous to the practice by reducing costs. And that might mean that they're just buying supplies and equipment at a discount, so they get those perks. They may have, contracts with a marketing company for websites and all this kind of stuff that, reduces your costs. And, they just do things better because they have the ability to buy at a discount because they have so many offices. And then they have the tools to centralize certain tasks, right? Like billing, insurance, HR, they have all those things, which of course saves time for your team and allows, the team to focus on the production numbers and the growth numbers and whatnot, and less on sort of the daily tasks that they may be involved with. Okay. They a lot of times they have access to some better technologies, in terms of equipment and other things, because they're sort of at the cusp of all that, from a diagnostic perspective and training perspective. So many of them, many of these DSOs have clinical days where they do a lot of training, for their dentists and their hygienists and other employees. And so there's advantages there. And then they have events that they put together where, there's a lot of group think and people spend a lot of time kind of talking to one another and learning about, one another as well. There's sometimes research opportunities. And what I mean by that is, there's abilities to grow within the entity, if you want to become a clinical director, if you want to, do other things that are maybe outside the normal scope of your practice, you get to do that, sometimes in these DSOs, right? In these DSOs. Now, of course, it impacts your compensation, so it's not all great, but if you're looking to diversify a little bit, that of course is there. One of the top things is the administrative burden is reduced from you. The old model of the DSOs was not like that. They promised that, but it didn't really happen. The new model for a lot of these new DSOs are absolutely, that is absolutely the case. Their goal is, and their number one goal, and it's not some like, thing that where we have to, pat them on the back and give them awards for, being humanitarians or anything, right? They're doing this because of money, right? But they want to relieve you of all your administrative burdens so that you can focus on clinical dentistry, because the more you focus on clinical dentistry, the higher the revenues and collections of the office, and their job is to reduce the expenses, which makes your practice and all of their practices much more profitable for a sale down the road, right? For a sale down the road. So huge advantages to that, for them and for you, right? And then they make sure that that the office is, from a regulatory perspective, whether it's HR, OSHA, HIPAA, whatever, is absolutely up to date so that you don't get sued and they don't get sued, right? They don't get sued. We talked about HR stuff, of course. A lot of these DSOs use HR companies like ours, like HR for Health, to do this, to make sure that everything is streamlined, because again, they just want to make sure you're not being sued, right? They're not being sued. Now, up to this point, you might think, oh well, maybe I should sell to a DSOs. Well, no, not necessarily, right? It's an option, right, for you, but it's not the right option for many of you, right? It's not the right option for many of you. And this is what's so important, right? Despite the advantages that we talked about, and despite the potential money that you could make from selling to a DSO, not the first time money, right? Not the first sale, but the second and third ones that I was talking about earlier, it's not necessarily the right opportunity for all of you. And I'm going to go through the disadvantages of joining a DSO, because these are very real disadvantages, right? Things that you really have to think about. So first is a loss of your complete autonomy, okay? What that means is that when you're part of a group, they are almost always going to buy a majority interest in your practice. So it might be 51%, it might be 70%, it might be 80% in some situations, but they will control your practice, right? They will control your practice at the end of the day. And if things, some are better than the others and others, so some will really be hands-off and let you run things the way, you have been for a long time. And some say they're going to be hands-off and they're less hands-off, but I can guarantee you, without fail, right? If your numbers start going down, if you start having issues with staff where you're getting sued or you're getting administrative law hearings, letters, or, if things start looking not so pretty, they will step in and take control of the day-to-day stuff in a way that allows, forces you to lose control and decision-making. And that might mean they may fire somebody that you don't want them to fire, or it might mean they hire people that you don't necessarily want them to hire. And part of this is because they have a game plan, right? They have a book, a plan that they do, that works. And a lot of times they allow you the flexibility to run the operations exactly the way you want it until it doesn't work, right? And then when it doesn't work, guess what? They're going to come in and say, here's our game plan, and here's what we're going to do to fix your, AR. And this is what we're going to do to fix your, hygiene department. This is what we're going to do to fix your HR or whatever, because the reality is they've done this so much that they know exactly how to fix things, right? And so you just have to be ready for that. And that's part of, giving up the control of your practice when you sell. You just have to be ready that even the best DSOs, may end up coming in and taking some control if things aren't going great, right? And part of that might also be a strategic shift that happens in the middle of you selling to them. And what I mean by that is, there might be economic realities that are occurring, right, that force changes in hiring and marketing and so on and so forth. I mean, right now, a lot of practices, even though we don't advise this, a lot of practices are pulling back spending money on marketing and some other things because they're afraid of the marketplace and of the economy and things of that nature. And even though, dentistry has proven itself to be recession proof, it's proven itself to, be pandemic proof in many places, it's there's still a certain fear of that. And so if sometimes, during those, after sale moments, if something happens to the economy or something happens from a micro or macro perspective, there may be dramatic shifts that occur. And if there's a dramatic shift, then those decisions may be made, right? Those decisions may be made. Now, part of that is your loss of full decision making. Now, most of the modern DSOs, the ones that we typically see, do want a lot of doctor owner involvement in decision making because you are a big part of who they are in terms of growth, right? The more you grow, the more they grow, especially if they're looking to sell again. So they want you to be part of the conversation, but sometimes it is hard to give up that control, right? It is hard to give up that control, especially if you've owned the practice for a long, long time, right? Especially if you've owned the practice for a long time. Now, some other negatives to think about, right, is that some of this patient experience and patient relationships change. Now, the smartest DSOs out there, the ones that we see out there and we think do the best, don't change your practice name. Don't come in and change the color of the office unless it's really bad. Don't change the flooring and the carpet. They just kind of leave the office the way it is because, again, they don't want any disruption, right? They don't want any disruption. But, sometimes there are things that change that also may change your relationship with the patient, right? So they may reduce, right, the amount of time you have with a patient, right? They might say, look, you got to do these procedures in this amount of time, right? Or, we're going to cut hygiene from a 50-minute appointment to a 40-minute appointment. Or, the most drastic one was to change it to a 30-minute appointment, which was like, chaotic, but things like that can happen, and sometimes do happen. So you just have to kind of be ready for that and change, with the times. A lot of DSOs don't do this because, again, as I mentioned, they want as little disruption as possible, but many do, right? Many do. Now, technically speaking, DSOs are not supposed to be part of the clinical, decision making because you have clinical autonomy. It's very clear, in the dental board rules about this. But they can put in protocols for that clinical part of the dentistry that you may not be accustomed to. That might be things as simple as ordering certain supplies and bonding material and not others, right? And some might be, much more dramatic things involved, right? And so you just have to kind of know that there may be some changes clinically as well. Now, some of our doctors say, look, if I've sold my practice and I'm, sold 70% and I'm rolling over 30%, I'm in it for the ride. I don't really care what happens. And some, don't feel that way at all and take it much more personally. So you just have to kind of note that. Employee morale may change. I put this as a disadvantage. There are some times when employee morale actually gets better because the DSOs, provide things that wasn't being provided before in the office. But a lot of times morale changes because, employees like being part of sometimes something smaller, and they don't, like being part of some conglomerate, they think. And so sometimes you get a lot of negative comments about, the doctor sold, to cash out, and he doesn't care about the patients, he doesn't care about us, or she doesn't, she didn't even speak to us about it, she just made the decision on her own, and things of that nature. So employee morale may absolutely change. And of course, the communications within the office changes too, because although some of the larger DSOs have regional managers and whatnot, a lot of times they don't, right? A lot of times they don't. So they're communicating through staff members, through email and newsletters and whatnot. So the communication starts to shift as well. And that's important for you to know as well, because it might become a little bit more not as personal as maybe you're used to in the way you communicate right now. Okay, and this could be simple things like doing weekly lunches with the team, and all that stuff may go away, right? May go away. All right. So you've been approached. You've made the decision that I want to explore selling to a DSO. What do you do next, right? What do you do next? And how do you go down through this process? Well, the due diligence process when selling to a DSO is vitally important, right? Vitally important, because you've got to make sure that you know as much as you can about them as they will know about you, because they will put you through the ringer, right? And they will verify everything by hiring a third party like PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte or whomever to do, to make sure that everything is correct. So the first step is to do an absolute comprehensive search, through their background, go on their website, see who their partners are, see if any of them are your classmates, give them a call, talk to them about, what they promise, is that what they delivered? A lot of these questions about their track record and their reputation, you can search online. A lot of it you can ask around. A lot of it, we as your lawyers will do for you and get that information. The next step is the financial analysis, and you must absolutely look at their financials as almost as closely as they're looking at yours. Now, they won't open up all of their books, but it's really important that you see their numbers and you look at their revenue models and how that works. Now, this is not something you should do personally. This is not something I can do for you as your lawyer. This is not something your CPA that you are currently using that does your bookkeeping and your annual taxes should do for you, no matter who they are, okay? There are DSO specific CPAs that all they do, right, for both sides, that's, I mean, not at the same time, but they work for buyers, they work for private equity and those folks, and they also work for the individual doctors. Of course, they don't, do things that conflict with one another, but there are specific CPAs that this is all they do. And this is exactly the people you need to hire, right? Please do not go to the CPA that you've used for the last 10, 20, 30 years doing your bookkeeping and your financial, analysis, your P&Ls and balance sheets and your tax returns. These folks, no matter who they are in dentistry, no matter who they are, they will not be able to help you navigate this very complex modeling, right? in regard, they might be afraid of losing you as a client, right? And so they want to hold on and they want to try to do their best, and they might even actually, tell you things that are not accurate because they don't understand them fully. And so they might tell you, oh, this is going to fall apart and this is a terrible deal for you. And it might be a terrible deal, but you need an independent party to tell you, right? You need one of these DSO CPAs, and there's only like 3 of them in the whole country that do this well. And they're very, the costs are very reasonable, right? They're not crazy. They're very sort of digestible for what they're providing. But they will go through and they will be able to tell you, does this modeling make sense? Does this modeling make sense for you? Does it make sense for the practices that they've already purchased and that they're operating, right? All of this is vital, because what the CPAs know that I don't know and that you don't know is how these numbers, really work together in a complex DSO model where there are umbrella companies and there are sub DSOs and there are sub DSOs. They, because of their experience, will be able to interpret those data and see if it makes sense. The group that imploded, that had about 13, offices, and they were about to buy about 6 more actually, but they their situation was so apparent to these DSO CPAs that very few others noticed. And the reason they were so apparent is because they looked at things like their cash burn, right? How much money was this DSO spending and burning on a month-to-month basis? Who do they have on their leadership team? And what were they paying those folks to do? And where did that money come from? And where did it go, right? Was that money being put back in terms of savings? Like, all these little things are so crucial, when doing this financial analysis. And these groups can do it for you, right? These groups can do it for you. The next thing is it a practice fit, right? Is it a practice fit? And what I mean by that is, do they offer, as a group, do they offer the services that you need and that you want to no longer do to take your practice to the next level if you're going to sell to them, right? And this is very important, because some DSOs, all they focus on is technology, right? They want to sell you, or they want you to buy a CAD CAM machine, and they want you to buy all these fancy lasers, and they want you to do all these fancy procedures that you may not want to do, but they want you to do all these because it'll grow your revenues, right? It'll grow your revenues, and they will control your expenses so that you can sell down the road, and they make money, you make money. But you might say, look, I don't want to do these. I don't want to do all these fancy procedures. I don't want to buy all these lasers. I don't want CAD CAM in my office. You may not want to do that. Then that group is not the right group for you, right? That group is not the right group for you. We have groups that come and they say, look, we're gonna fire the office manager. We're gonna fire this person and that person. We're gonna manage it all remotely with our team. Sometimes that's a good thing, and doctors want that, right? Because they're overpaying for their office manager, or they don't feel like the office manager is providing value, and they want that. Some don't, because they value their team members, specific team members more, and so that's not a good fit. So you got to make sure that it's a practice fit, right? You got to fit, and then you want to make sure that they have legal and regulatory compliance, and they're doing it well, right? They're doing it well. We see. We don't represent any of the largest DSOs, right? There's other law firms that are much bigger than our law firm that represent the largest DSOs. It's kind of like if we represented like Microsoft. We could never do that, right? We were just too small. But there's some law firms that do the regulatory really well for DSOs, and then there are some that if a DSO goes to like some small law firm in, Florida that, doesn't do any medical dental work, or they don't have any regulatory work, I would be very nervous about that DSO, because they're cutting corners, right? You know, the DSO world is a highly regulated, carefully managed, you know, part of dentistry by the dental boards and, you know, by other groups, you know, like, you know, and so you have to be very careful that they're abiding by all the rules, and especially if they're in multiple states. And so that part of it is very important, right? Are they doing HR correctly? Are they doing any of these other things? You know, OSHA, HIPAA, you know, compliance. Are they doing all those right? You know, we had a DSO recently actually who was going to buy one of our doctor's offices, and my doctor has 3 offices, 12 independent contractors, and had converted all these independent contractors to employees in the last, you know, 12 to 18 months, because she wanted to sell, her and her partner actually wanted to sell to a DSO. And it was a hard change, right? To change, you know, independent contractors to employees, because you have to pay more, you know, there's, you know, paid sick leave that you have to pay, you know, there's just costs. Well, we're going through due diligence, and this DSO starts talking about converting these people back to independent contractors, and, you know, taking all that risk again. And so we actually ended up killing the deal because they were being so cavalier about it that it was going to increase the risk to our doctor and to them down the road. And the last thing you want is to be bought by somebody who's going to get sued, right? With all these HR violations, because as you guys know, and that I know, and you know that I know, that HR violations are very, very expensive. Hence the reason we created HR4L, and we would never allow that to happen, right? And it was a very hard thing to swallow, because, you know, going through a process with selling to a DSO is very expensive and very time consuming, but it was the best thing that happened, right? It was the best thing that happened, because shortly thereafter, you know, we got interest levels from other DSOs that actually were paying even more. And it's going to work out, I'm sure. But you just have to be careful about that, right? You got to be careful about that. Okay, contracts. I mean, you absolutely have to have, you know, us review the contracts, right? From the very first one do you get the letter of intent. You know, this is not one of those where you just sign because it's non-binding. A lot of these have serious repercussions. So from the letter of intent to, you know, the purchase contracts to the employment contracts, you have to have legal counsel with experience like us doing it for you. I mean, just there's no way around it. And it's not cheap, right? A process for the sale of your DSO could easily be anywhere from 10, 12,000 on the low end to 25, 30,000 in legal fees over 6 to 9 months, right? Because sometimes it takes that long. So it's not a cheap process. It's not like signing a lease and you spend, you know, $3,000, $4,000 and you're done. This is very, very complicated transactions. So just be aware of that. But this is not where, you know, you have to have it reviewed, and you do not want to skimp on this, because this is where all of your wealth is sort of sitting potentially. Okay, so we talked about, you know, a regulatory compliance too. All right, then there's the exit strategy. What are your legal strategies for getting out in case the partnership doesn't work out, or in case you need to transition, God forbid, because of disability or death or just things change, right? So you got to have an exit strategy in these contracts. And a lot of times, lawyers, you know, don't do this because they don't have the experience to put that language in there. Same thing with intellectual property, your logo, your name, your likeness, right? You know, if you end up not practicing there in 5, 6 years, you know, what can they do with your likeness? You know, there's certain things that are governed by the dental board and certain things that are governed by contract. And so we need to figure that out, and we need to figure out who owns the intellectual property and how is it going to be transferred. Okay. All right. So as we select the right partners, here are what it's going to break down, right? Alignment of goals, right? Very first thing, right? You want to make sure that the strategic vision aligns with yours. Okay. And us and the CPAs that I would refer you to, you know, will help you with that to make sure that's there. The second thing is transparency, right? Are they being transparent with you regarding their financials, how they, make decisions, at a company level, but also at a practice level, and then their operational plans. And I always think about, the Ronald Reagan quote from the 80s when he was talking about the Russians, and he said, trust, but verify, right? The same thing applies to DSOs, right? Not that I'm comparing them to Russians, but, trust, but verify, right? Take what they say at their word, but then verify it, right? How do you verify it? Well, you verify it by having us look at the legal documents, by having the CPA look at the financial documents, by talking to their other, partners, maybe your classmates or others that Just make sure we verify everything, right? Hugely, hugely important. Do they have the experience? Do they have the reputation? Just because someone is speaking from the front of the stage, okay, at a conference about a DSO doesn't necessarily mean that that DSO has a proven track record. Okay, so you have to make sure that you go beyond just a dentist's clinical reputation, and you really look at the business itself that they're part of, and is that business strong? As many of dentists and doctors are great clinicians, but sometimes not as good when it comes to business. And so again, trust but verify, right? Trust but verify. If there's someone you respect, who's clinically talking, clinically you respect them, and they're talking about a DSO for you to join and whatnot, great, look into it. Have your advisors look into it, but make sure you're verifying what they're saying, okay? Don't just go on their word, okay? And then communication. Absolutely make sure that, there's a line of communication there, that, you're not going to be just talking to, some, regional person, but that there's people that you can communicate with. If you need to, have reach to the upper management, that you have people that you can talk to, about problems and growth and whatnot. And is that communication real, right? Is that communication real? Now, for those of you who want to learn more and who want to take this to another level, HR for Health has a conference called the DSO Leadership Summit. It's a conference for emerging DSOs. So these are folks who have 3 or more offices, 2, 3 or more offices, who want to either grow their offices or that want to sell to DSO. Okay. Now this year's conference is in Austin. Okay, we're holding it there. It's a very unique, event. We sell out every year. It's something that if you're interested in learning more, it's something that you want to do. It's a great way to network with private equity people. It's a great way of networking with other DSOs who, may be interested in purchasing you. You're going to learn from DSOs who are like you, who are in the middle of the process, in the beginning of it. It's a very intimate group. Usually, last year in Nashville, we had 500 people. This year in Austin, we'll probably have about 800 people, but we set it up very intimately with a lot of different events. So go check out the website, dsosummit.com. We have some speed networking where you talk to the best CPAs, as I was mentioning, lawyers, private equity, bankers. I mean, you name it, they are there, and they are there open kimono to tell you everything and anything you want. They don't hold back. We have an M&A workshop where you learn about the transition in a lot of detail from different groups that we were just talking about, and you get to pick their brains, again, from the best CPAs and lawyers and others. And then we have something called a diagnosis, the DSO diagnosis, where 3 small, medium, or large DSOs come and they tell us all their problems, and a group of speakers, that we've handpicked from the stage, diagnose them and give them advice on how to become stronger, better offices. It's fascinating, the information that they reveal, really, really making them vulnerable in front of the whole audience. It's a pretty awesome moment, and one of our most popular things that we do. If you want to go, just take a picture of this QR code, use this code Ali 2023, and you'll get 10% off of your sign up fee, of course. So if you have a couple of days in the second week of October, it's well worth it. Trust me when I say we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun events as well, but the education is like second to none. And it's meant for DSOs and those who want to either sell to them or grow into it. So really great. All right. Now I promised you something. I promised you the one mistake I don't want you to commit. Okay. The one mistake that I see over and over and over again that impacts your entire transaction if you ever want to sell to a DSO. Okay. And this actually really applies to any sale, but it really applies to the DSOs because they are by far the most strategic when it comes to this, right? When it comes to this. So you have to be careful, okay? Obviously, I can't see you guys raising your hands because we're doing this, remotely. But the one mistake I want all of you to avoid is that when a DSO contacts you, if you raise your hand to get more information, God bless you, go for it. Get as much information as you want for them. But the second that they ask you for your financials, do not provide it to them, right? Don't provide them a tax return. Don't provide them a P&L, a balance sheet. Do not ever provide them with any financials, even under a non-disclosure agreement, even if they give you an NDA, do not disclose your financials to them, okay? Because your financials, as prepared by your CPA, are meant for the IRS, okay? They're meant to reduce your taxes. So there are things there, right? Creative accounting measures, write-offs and things that you have done and other things that are meant to reduce your taxes with the IRS. Well, how do you reduce your taxes? You increase your expenses, right? The less, the more expenses you have, the less income you show, the less tax you pay. That is the exact opposite thing that you should be doing for a DSO. Because what did I mention to you earlier? How are DSOs valued? They're valued on your profitability. So if you give those financials to a DSO, you're already losing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars. Okay. So do not do it under any circumstances, right? Under any circumstances, if you are serious about selling to a DSO, right, you have to prepare your financials in a way that allows you to sell to a DSO strategically, right? Allows you to sell to a DSO in a way that maximizes your value, right? Maximizes your value. And we can show you how to do that, right? We can show you how to do that because it's got to be done with not your CPA, but one of these DSO CPAs. It's got to be done and presented in a way that allows you to maximize your practice, okay? And sometimes you'll go through that exercise that I'm about to tell you, the one that we were just talking about, where you're maximizing your value, and you realize you don't have the practice to sell to a DSO, right? There's just not that much money there. Or sometimes you realize, you know what, I could do better, right? I could do even better with my numbers, not just top line, but also expense wise. And then I'll go in a year and sell. It's a eye-opening experience. It's a totally eye-opening experience. But please do not do that, right? You're just shortchanging yourself and you're shortchanging your family. It's just not worth it, right? Just not worth it. So what do we bring to the table if you decide to sell? Obviously we've got our legal expertise. We'll show you how to navigate this whole, process, introduce you to all the right people so that you can, interview them and make sure you like them so that they can do these financial analyses for you, introduce you, to, the DSOs that they know and that we know that may be interested. Obviously, we'll do your contracts for you. Our team is super, obviously, knowledgeable about that. If there's anything from a licensing compliance perspective, we'll make sure you're compliant before you ever sell, so you don't ever get sued. And if there is a dispute, then we'll help you navigate through that too. If you want to learn more about how to sell your practice to a DSO and you want sort of something to read, I wrote a white paper on how to sell to a DSO, the ultimate guide. Please, take a picture of this from your phones, and you put your email in there. You'll get the white paper in your email address, and you can read it whenever you want. So please take advantage of that. And I'll leave this up for a little bit, and then I'll go to the final slide. So let me go through these questions, if it's all right with you guys, and Mike, Jim, if you guys are okay. So let me go through. So one question, the first question was, why did those DSOs implode? Why did they implode? Great question. So 2 of the DSOs imploded because they didn't have the financial protections in place to make sure that the businesses were operationally profitable, and that the structure of the management company was profitable. So what do I mean by that? So in both situations, they were in the middle. Actually, one was at the end of it, but it was the same problem. When you get to a certain revenue, I think it's 6 million or 7 million, the IRS requires you to change from a cash system or cash, protocol to accrual. Okay, most of you are on a cash basis. Money comes in, you recognize it, but accrual is a lot more complex. Well, both of these groups didn't have good, financial, systems in place. So when they made the change to accrual, they started losing track of truly how much money was coming in, how much money was going out, and so on and so forth. And they were able to navigate that for actually a couple of years, because dentistry is such a good business that it's so cash heavy that they were able to sort of avoid these problems by kind of dancing around it, not really realizing what was happening. But at some point, they couldn't do it anymore, and it became very apparent that they were losing a lot of money, and that they could not make it up. And so those, and that goes to all the things we talked about: lack of experience from the management team, lack of good systems in place, because they weren't using a DSO specific CPA. They were using a dental CPA that had no idea how to structure these things, and then had bad hires at the high level, right? They had a lot of hires that they hired at the DSO, but not people that knew enough to be able to manage these offices. So that was one. The other one that had that'll have a lot more offices. They were running sort of at a loss for a while, and then their funding kind of dried up, right? Their funding kind of dried up, and when it dried up, they tried to sell themselves to someone else. But as you can imagine, they had sort of a riot, because all the doctors that were that had sold to them in the partnership realized very quickly that there was about to be a fire sale. So what they were promised, being sold at 12, 14 or whatever X, to go down that road, that was definitely not going to happen. In fact, a lot of them, that whole group ended up being split apart and sold in pieces. But a lot of those doctors got really, really screwed, because even though they got a lot of money up front, they didn't get anything on the back end, and some of them actually took back their practices and whatnot. So it always comes back to not having the financial systems in place, not having a good management team, or a combination of those two, and then waiting, and not really knowing what's happening until it's too late, and then when it's too late, it just all falls apart. So anyway, so that was the question. next question is, I'm an associate in an endo practice that was sold to a DSO. They're asking me to invest into their model and promising big returns on this investment. Do you think it's a good idea to do it now? So, yeah, when these DSOs, buy, these offices, and like I said, endo, like almost every endo practice in the Bay Area has been purchased in one way or another. At least it seems that way. The way they hold, and they keep the investment for themselves, these DSOs, is they want the doctors, the associates, to become partners for many reasons, right? One is when you become a partner, then you're an owner, and so you're less likely to leave. And if you're less likely to leave, then they can count on you to continue growing the practice, right? So that's one advantage. The second advantage is that California, at least, has very strict laws about non-competition, and you cannot, as a business owner, prevent your associates from competing against you. So if you're an associate, you could go open up 2 doors down, and they can't do anything about that. But when you're an owner, they can prevent you from competing against them, right? So that's another reason, right? Now, is it all bad? No, absolutely not. Depending on the group, right? Depending on the group that wants you to buy in, depending on where they are, this could be a really good investment for you, especially if you don't ever plan on owning your own office. Now, I'm telling you right now, there's no doubt about it. If you're a young doctor associating, owning your own practice, especially if you're a specialist, you will always make more money owning your own practice, almost always, if you're a specialist. But if you don't ever plan on owning your practice, or you don't want to have the headache of owning, investing in a DSO that has bought the practice you're working at, under the right circumstances, if analyzed properly, could work out. But there's a big if. There's a lot of groups, large, DSOs, that also make big promises, but they don't work out, right? They don't work out. Like there's one group that I won't name names, but sells shares all the time. It's not, it's a GP DSO, sells shares all across California, and they make all these big promises, but a lot of people who bought them are buying actually into debt. So you end up having to pay money, or your profits are so low that it never works out. So to answer your question, it could be good, but you have to look at the details, and you have to have one of these really strong CPAs do an analysis for you, and they will tell you if it's good or bad, and then you can make a decision. So okay, the next question is, have you seen private practice sales to a DSO where the dentist contracted to stay on for 1 to 3 years and became disillusioned by secondary dentists who the DSO brought in, and who, per the original owner, diagnosed treatment with the seeming primary goal of increasing production, not based on the actual dental pathology observed? Sadly, yes. Sadly, yes. Because you hit on, by the way, whoever wrote this, it's an anonymous post. Whoever wrote this, that was like a beautiful paragraph. It's a run-on sentence, but very beautifully written. Yeah, absolutely. It happens a lot. It happens a lot where the DSOs bring in very aggressive associates, or very aggressive, dentists who, do a lot more dentistry than you might be used to, right? Instead of watching things, they're doing things, right? I can't say sitting here whether that was, correct or not correct, and it may be your opinion that it was too aggressive, and they might think that it wasn't too aggressive. We won't get into that part, but that does happen, right? That does definitely happen. If you were to walk away from that, you would lose a lot, right? Because of the fact that, if they, sell in a couple of years, there's a lot of money potentially at stake. But that does happen, and it's a hard thing for a lot of people, unfortunately. But we can always talk about it, but you'd have to make a decision. Is it best for your family for you to stay in and finish those 1 to 3 years, or and maybe benefit from the sales down the road so that you can solidify your financial well-being with the family? Or do you feel so strongly that it's best for you to walk away and either retire fully or go work somewhere far where you're not in violation of their covenant not to compete? Okay. I hope somewhere in the presentation, Ali will touch on what happens after the buying DSO sells to a bigger DSO. Do dentists have a say? What happens to the autonomy? Medical and pharmaceuticals nowadays draw a scary picture in the future when corporate takes over. So when you sell, and I did bring this up earlier, but I'll mention it again. When you sell to a DSO, you're in for the ride. So you don't get a say as to whom they sell to down the road. Okay, there's things called tag along rights, where you just tag along for the ride. They make all the decisions, and they pick who they sell to, and you go along with it. It doesn't mean, though, that you have to keep your interest after the second time or after they sell. So you could, in many situations, sell all of your interest and walk away. Usually the buyer will provide some sort of incentive for you to stay, because again, they want to do it again down the road. But you don't have to. And just so you know, everyone who's listening, usually the amount of money you get the first time, let's call it, $5 million, right? You will get that same money the second time. And sometimes, so you'll double. And then again, if they do it again. So the way the numbers work, you almost double the second time, and then you double again. So because you're getting such a higher multiple, that's been sort of my experience with the deals that we've done. So there's serious advantages, right? There's serious advantages, but they don't give you any rights in many of those situations, because they don't want one person to ruin a deal for them. Because if you're getting $5 million, imagine what they're getting, right? It's hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes. What happens to your business entity when you sell to a DSO? Do you maintain your S corp? How does it affect your taxes, retirement plans? So depending on the structure, they are buying your assets. So in many situations, you can keep your S corp. Most of the time, your retirement plans and other things can stay with your S corp as is, although your employees will transfer obviously to the DSO. So that can be maintained. Sometimes, depending on the structure, your entity has to go away and you have to set up a new entity, but most times your entity can stay there. What are the pros and cons of a practice associate becoming a DSO partner after the owner sells to a DSO? The pros and cons are, there's a lot of different, benefits and drawbacks to an associate buying into a DSO once it's sold. The smart DSOs, the more modern ones, have really strong, powerful programs for associates, because again, they're the lifeline, right? The associates are the lifeline that continues the practice growth for the future. Because if you're an associate and you leave and you go open up down the street, a lot of those patients will follow you. And so that's a very scary thought for DSOs. So the smart DSOs will put, really strong programs in there. That being said, I can't really go into detail about the pros and cons, because it's less about that and it is which DSO it is that's buying you. There are some DSOs that I can tell you right now you should never buy into, right? And there are some that are wonderful, right? Because we've seen it. And then there are some that were wonderful 5 years ago, but today they're not as lucrative as an opportunity, right? So it just all depends on the DSO and the financials that they're offering, right? The financials that they're offering. who are the DSO specific CPAs that you would recommend? Reach out to me. My emails are there, and then we can talk about what you need, and then I'll refer you to the right person. How does the tax council work selling to a DSO with large income in 1 year? I think the question is, what happens if I get a large check from a DSO for selling like 70% of my practice or whatnot? Usually, most of this is long-term capital gains, right? So you pay 20% tax on it, which is really good. A portion of it could be going at your normal tax rate, so that could be at 40% or higher if you're in the top tax bracket. But usually, if you're getting $4, $5, $6 million, paying 20% of that in tax is just part of what you have to do, because you have to pay long-term capital gains. There are some groups out there, some DSOs, that have this sort of very intricate way for you to divide how much they pay you over a long period of time, and they sell it to you as sort of a way for you to minimize your taxes. I would stay away from those. I haven't seen them in California, thankfully, but I have seen them in a lot of other states. It's a way for them, they sell it to you as a way for you to minimize your taxes, but what it does is it actually reduces the risk, because they're not paying you, right, up front. And so you're taking all the risk, because if they go under or something bad happens or the business fails, whatever, guess who doesn't get paid? You, right? So it's a very tricky situation. I would take my 70%, take your money, go invest it, pay off some debt, whatever, and then go for the ride for the rest of it. But we can talk in more detail about your situation if you have it. Okay, in comparing financials, how do you make up a 6x profit sale times 2 versus running your own practice? How do you make up a 6x profit sale times 2 versus running your own practice? Can you ask that question again, slightly differently? I'm not sure I completely understand. Oh, why wouldn't you sell? For all the negatives that we were just talking about, right? A lot of times that is the reason why people sell to DSOs, is because it is such bigger dollars, right? Such bigger dollars. But remember, you're not selling 100%, you're selling anywhere from 50, 60 to 70%. So you don't get all the money up front. A lot, 20, 30 to 50, 60%, goes, into the larger entity. So there is that component of it where you're taking risk on some of the money. But yes, you're right. I mean, it is hard. It's a hard thing to skip sometimes when you see big dollars. What I have experienced in having done this with a lot of clients, is if you're in your 30s to your, late 40s, owning your practice, you would still, if you continue practicing for at least 10 to 15 years, you will still make more money doing it that way if you have a strong practice than selling to a DSO, even at, almost triple the price. If you're in your early 50s and up, no matter how many years you work, this calculation with the DSOs will almost certainly be better for you, because if you remember what I said, they try to flip to a larger DSO every 3 to 5 years. So if you're in your early 50s, you might get the first sale, and then you might get 2 more bites at the apple. So, you could triple your money, right? And so sometimes it's hard to avoid. It's a hard thing to avoid in that. And I'll be honest, my wife, who, I won't tell you her age, but she's younger than 50 by quite a bit. This is a very real possibility even for her and all of her classmates and all of our friends, because the numbers are so staggering, right? They're so staggering. And so I'm not saying she'll do it. I'm not saying, it's the right thing for us, but what I'm saying is, even if you're in your 40s, it might be the right option if you're tired of sort of all the things we're talking about. So there's a lot of balancing. But the reason that the Dental Society wanted me to talk to you guys about this is because, of course, it's out there. We're getting a lot of questions about it, but the most important thing is that a lot of people are going into these things blind, trusting the DSOs, trusting the private equity people, and you should not do that. They are very good people. A lot of them are very honest, right? But it doesn't mean that it's the right thing for you. You got to make sure you're taking the right steps throughout the whole thing to make sure it works for you exactly the way you're hoping. Because it's such a big financial risk. And if you make the wrong decision, then it could have some serious repercussions. So anyhow, I hope this was helpful. Mike, I think that's it in terms of questions. But you guys have my info here on the screen. Feel free to email hello@DM Council, and my team will help schedule a time, or you can call the office, and I'm happy to consult with all of you guys. Not a problem to chat for 15, 30 minutes and just kind of get more info. Those of you who want the white paper, it's here. If you want, where was it? If you want the code to the DSO Leadership Summit in Austin, here it is. Here's that code. So anyhow, I hope you guys have all the information you need, and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you to Ali for answering all the questions. It was a great Q&A session after the presentation, and we're just thankful for your time this evening, and just thankful for everyone joining us. We hope you found the information helpful. This meeting was recorded and will be emailed and posted on our SMCDS YouTube channel. So stay safe and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.